The symbolism of the Falcon, Horus, and the story of Osiris. There are two major themes running through the symbolism of the falcon or hawk. The first is its role as an archetype. See our archetype video. The second is the part it plays in the Egyptian story of Osiris, where it is named Horus. The hawk or falcon as an archetype. The falcon or hawk was traditionally the bird of Mars and associated as a consequence with war. Hafiz of Shiraz, 30 poems, translated by Peter Avery and John Heath Stubbs. O royal keen-eyed falcon, whose perch is on the tree of life, why is this corner of affliction's town your nest? They are whistling you home from the battlements of the Empyrean. What could you be doing here, in this place of snares? It was said to be of the fifth heaven, just below Jupiter and its bird, the eagle, which was symbolically the sixth heaven, the realm of kings. And through these associations, we can see that a falcon or hawk is a soldier, a fighter, loyal to his high-ranking master. From The Hawk by Farid ud-Din Attar, English version by Rafiq Abdullah, original language Persian, Farsi. He was a soldier with a soldier's pride, this hawk, whose home was by a king's side. He was haughty as his master. All other birds thought him a disaster. His beak was feared as much as his talons. With hooded eyes, his place on the royal roster was his prize. He stands sentinel on the king's arm, polite and trained meticulously to do what is right and proper with courtly grace. But in the story of Osiris, hawk-like qualities are used far more effectively to provoke and sustain much-needed change. Dr. Jordan Peterson, The Story of Osiris, Seth, Horus, and Isis. Osiris is a great king. He established the Egyptian state. You could think of him as the embodiment of Egyptian custom and tradition. He was great when he was young, but he's not young anymore. He's old, and he's willfully blind. And what that means is that he refuses to see what he should see. He represents a paternal spirit that's old and willfully blind, because it's a construction of the dead, and the dead can't update themselves anymore. Osiris won't look where he knows he should look. He doesn't have the energy, or maybe he doesn't have the spirit. Seth is not a good guy, and Osiris knows it, but he underestimates his malevolence and power, and Seth wants to rule the kingdom. So what does that mean? It's easy. Every stable society is threatened by willful blindness and malevolence. Always, every bureaucracy has that proclivity to stagnate and to become blind. That's why corporations die all the time. That's why a Fortune 500 company only lasts 30 years. It's why we have to have elections. It's to stop the dead from staying in control. Osiris turns a blind eye to Seth. Seth is happy about that. Seth one day waits for Osiris to make a mistake and to be weak, and he attacks him, and he chops him up into pieces, and distributes the pieces across the entire Egyptian state, so he can't get himself back together. Things fall apart, and they can't be brought back together, but the spirit of Osiris still lives in the pieces. So what happens? And here we will pause, because although it is clear this is an allegorical story, we need to explore what rebirth means to understand what happens next. Rebirth. Rebirth is a stage on the spiritual path, but it can apply to humans, businesses, countries, states, in fact any named entity. It is, analogously, like the implementation of a completely new version of a system or a piece of software. So not a bug fix, a major new version. The old version has to figuratively die and the new version take over. But as you can imagine, this can be a most painful time, whatever the entity affected. It can happen to people, individuals, and near-death experiences sometimes result in rebirth, a real change in the way a person behaves and thinks. Figuratively, using the computer analogy, it feels like a shutdown, a sort of death, and afterwards a restart as a new you functionally. You are really not sure you're the same person. Often, you are not. And people who experience this whilst conscious describe the sensation using a number of quite gruesome figurative events. Beheading, the constant demand of Lewis Carroll's Red Queen in Alice in Wonderland. Being consumed. Boiled in a cauldron, symbolically represented by beautiful objects such as the Gunderstrup cauldron. Being stoned, called lapidation, and said to be the fate of Saint-Étienne. Dismemberment, the story of Osiris, where the body is dismembered and spread about before being put back together again. Pierced with swords and arrows, the fate of Saint Teresa. And Bernini very clearly shows the spiritual nature of the experience. Being flayed. This is Saint Bartholomew. Source: Lama Casa, Dawa Samdup's rendering in W.Y. Evans Vence, Tibetan Yoga and Secret Doctrines. Some tantric meditations have as their object the practitioner's stripping his own body of flesh and contemplating his skeleton. The yogin is asked to imagine his body as a corpse and his mind as an angry goddess with a face and two hands holding a knife and a skull. Think that she severeth the head from the corpse, and cutteth the corpse into bits, and flingeth them inside the skull as offerings to the deities. Finally, a third meditation sets the yogin the task of contemplating himself as transformed into the raging Dakini, stripping the skin from his own body. Rebirth was a standard process of initiates on the spiritual path in practically all shamanic and mystic societies at one time. H. Lingroth, the natives of Sarawak and British North Borneo. And there, as they assert, they cut his head open, take out his brains, wash and restore them, to give him a clear mind, to penetrate into the mysteries of evil spirits and the intricacies of disease. They insert gold dust into his eyes to give him keenness and strength of sight, powerful enough to see the soul wherever it may have wandered. They plant barbed hooks on the tips of his fingers to enable him to seize the soul and hold it fast. And lastly, they pierce his heart with an arrow to make him tender-hearted and full of sympathy for the sick and suffering. From Aboriginal Men of High Degree, A.P. Elkin. In central and north-central Australia, spirits of the eternal dream time, or spirits of the dead, kill the postulant and through an abdominal incision remove his insides and substitute new ones together with some magical substances. If medicine men are the operators, crystals extracted from their own bodies are pressed and scored and jerked into the postulant's body. He is also given crystals in his food and drink. In addition, a hole is pierced in his tongue. This ritual is interpreted by the members of the profession as a death, during which the postulant is operated upon and receives additions to his insides, and after which he is restored to life. So as we can see, this figurative process was once found worldwide, and Osiris appears to have been through this initiation process. There is a possibility that all the people in sarcophagi we assume died naturally may have died as a consequence of an initiation process that either went very wrong or which they could not psychologically withstand. See our video, Robins and Rebirth. The story continued. So, Osiris represents the old system: business, state, city, religion, human being, and so on, with all its flaws, and the rebirth process has resulted in chaos and fragmentation. And as a consequence, whereas Seth is the cause of the fragmentation, the forces of destruction, death and change, this fragmented system has to be put back together again in a new form. Enter Isis, the feminine to Osiris's masculine. Dr. Jordan Peterson, The Story of Osiris, Seth, Horus and Isis. Isis is looking for order. KS cries out for order. She's looking for order, and she goes all around Egypt trying to put Osiris back together. It's a state of chaos. She finds his phallus. Isis makes herself pregnant. She goes back down to the underworld, and she gives birth to Horus. In the video on the symbolism of fish, we explain that there is a fish in the Nile Egyptians called the penis of Osiris. A fish symbolically is a carrier of messages, ideas, inspiration and wisdom, for example, and the Nile was symbolically a river. Video, rivers and streams. In other words, Isis first travelled the length and breadth of the country, getting as much information as she could to base a new system on, but she sought inspiration and wisdom from the fish messenger carrying the new ideas from the ocean of wisdom, and impregnated herself with these seeds of a new idea. In effect, she got the inspiration for how to change the system and produce a new child, a new system, based on the old. Or as we now say, let's get this baby on the road. We all know that revolution causes chaos, destruction, and needless death, and often does not work. The new may be worse than the old, but evolutionary change can work and has worked. But you need a mother with ideas, a stable but out-of-date father, who together produce a son. And this we described in the Symbolism of the Mother, Father and Son video. This Egyptian myth reinforces the once universal symbolism of the mother being the one who gets the ideas, but also incorporates the idea of a great mother who sees this through gestation to birth. The son, then, is the new system. Dr. Jordan Peterson. The story of Osiris, Seth, Horus and Isis continued. Horus is the son of the Great Father and the Great Mother. He's a messianic figure, and in fact much of the mythology that described Horus was extracted without much modification and then attributed to Christ. And you see pictures of Isis with Horus on her lap that are virtually identical in content and form to the later pictures of Mary with the infant Christ. It's not a Christian motif. It's far deeper than a Christian motif. It's a human motif, an archetype. And it is also where the symbolism of a virgin birth came from, as Isis was impregnated with ideas, not semen. And Horus is symbolically a falcon. Very, very keen sight and a fighter. Today we might say he's on the ball, and instead of ignoring the degeneration that has taken place, he confronts it, head on. Dr. Jordan Peterson continued, Horus does not underestimate Seth. He knows exactly what he's up against. He goes and has a terrible battle with him, trying to get his kingdom back. And as he and Seth are fighting, Seth tears out one of Horus's eyes. Now why? Because Seth is the embodiment of destruction and malevolence, and no matter how conscious you are, if you encounter that, even voluntarily, the probability that it's going to damage your consciousness is extraordinarily high. And that's why people don't do it. But Horus, despite being in a damaged, bleeding and one-eyed state, does not sit back and just take over the kingship. He risks even more by descending into the underworld in order to find Osiris, the ghost or essence of the old system. And he gives Osiris his eye. Now Osiris can see, figuratively speaking, and as a consequence is revived, resurrected. Resurrection, redemption and regeneration. Dr. Jordan Peterson. You go down into the chaotic, the area threatened by malevolence, even to the point of damage to your own consciousness. You go down into the chaos, and you find the dead spirit of your tradition, and you give it vision. And so, provided with vision, Osiris regenerates, and then Osiris and Horus go back up to the world, linked together, and rule jointly. In other words, to change any system, whether it is a country, state, city, business, group, or human being, rebirth is an essential process involving destruction of the old, inspiration and help from the spiritual realm to formulate a new system, the birth of the new system, the battle and hopefully defeat of the forces of destruction, and then the final winning over of the old stick-in-the-muds who caused the decline and decay in the first place. But it is impossible to do this unless, as a symbolic falcon, you have eyes sharp enough to spot the sources of malevolence and chaos, You have within you the seeds of the old system, and you help those still supporting the old system to see what was wrong with it and get them to help you.